Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker. The news feed on any given day is heartbreaking. People are not only losing hope, they're losing heart. And we need our hearts back. We need true hope. It is possible in the middle of the sorrows of life to experience a life-changing, reality-based joy that is tethered to the hope we have in Christ. Written in one of the toughest years of her life, Stacey Eldredge explores how to embrace the mystery that suffering and joy can coexist. From the loss of loved ones and physical pain to depression, struggles with food, she provides a blueprint to choose love over fear and fully understand that because of God, we can know a joy that is defiant in the face of this broken world. Defiant Joy is a clarion call to press into the heart of God in a new and life-giving way. In the age we're living in, possessing joy can feel almost impossible. Yet we're called to have joy. And if we're called to it, then it's possible. This book is an invitation to know a joy fully grounded in hope that strengthens us and sustains us in the middle of everyday lives, in the middle of extremely painful seasons as well. This is what it means to have defiant joy, to live in the mystery of beauty and sadness, of the sacred in pain, of hope in the face of death. No matter what, we can know joy because death has been defeated. Life is won. Stacey Eldredge is a New York Times bestselling author, and her books have sold nearly 3 million copies and changed women's lives all over the world. A teacher and conference speaker, Stacey is the director of the women's ministry at Ransomed Heart and leads captivating retreats internationally. Her passion is to see lives transformed by the beauty of the gospel. She and her family make their home in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Here to talk about her newest book, Defiant Joy, Taking Hold of Hope, Beauty, and Life in a Hurting World, is Stacey Eldredge. Stacey, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be with you today.
Well, we're delighted to have you. I think that your story is not only is compelling, but has been compelling. And the ministry that's been formed through your husband John and yourself have truly captivating is exactly what it is. I've read your books, I've read John's books,
Wonderful.
a longing for something in a lot of areas that I've not obtained. And because of that, I wanted to have assurance that it was there, even though I may not have obtained it in my life.
Yes.
And that to be able to preach it, knowing that it actually does exist. It's just not something that I've harvested from this supernatural book, the Bible, but that there are real life examples, maybe not my own life, but there are others I can turn to that have experienced it, that I can say, you know, don't take it from me, take it from them. Now, the Stacey Eldredge you are today is not the Stacey Eldredge you've always been.
No, certainly not.
And
No.
so there's been a journey, and there's been a faith journey along the way. And there have been people who have spoken into your life, both, as God says, blessings and curses, life and death. And the choices that you've made over your lifetime have been to be on this side of being defiantly joyful. But let's go back to the early years, to the testimony of Stacey Eldredge as to how you first came to faith and what that looked like, what that journey was like for you, and how these many years later it's grown into really a worldwide movement of people understanding about a ransomed heart, about being captivating and being captivated.
Well, there is nothing I would like to talk about more than the testimony of God in my life. So if I talk too much, you just cut me off if you want me to go a different direction. I was raised in a family where I was the last of 4 children that were born too close together. And I was the straw that broke my mother's back, we could say. And one of my earliest memories is her telling me how she was devastated when she learned she was pregnant with me. So that was, and I knew it already. And it was a 3-year-old girl, you kind of sense these things. And then my father was a traveling salesman. So he would be gone for 3 weeks and home for a couple of days, and then gone for 3 weeks, home for a couple of days for 18 years. So I was raised by an overwhelmed mother who had unaddressed pain in her own life, and it did not go well in my family. When my father would come home, he was an alcoholic, and he would rage, and sometimes the safest place for me was to hide. And so I would hide in the closet. I would they didn't know who I was. They needed me to need nothing. And so that's what I did. Needed nothing and tried to stay as invisible as possible. Because of that, because of my home life, I started drinking when I was 10 and smoking when I was 11, got into drugs by the time I was 12, and found some solace in boys by the time I was 14. Then when I went off to college is when I became really crazy. I was very cavalier with my life. I didn't think I had any worth whatsoever. And so my friends were coke dealers, and I really lived on a seedy side of life. And you would not recognize me. Now, I wouldn't recognize me, but even in all of those years, I was searching. I was wanting meaning, and it was my early 20s that I became hungry for spiritual things, and I sought them in different areas, in false places and meditation, and even through drugs and encounters that way. And I actually had known my husband in high school. We'd met in drama class, and he was an evangelical atheist.
Mm.
And we would get together and do drugs together. That was our relationship. One summer, no, it was October actually. I came home and called him up, and he came over. Normally, we would just do drugs together. Well, he told me he had become a Christian, and it was the biggest 180 I had experienced in anyone. And I could tell he was different, and I was fascinated. And so, because of him, I found the Bible on our shelf in the light, on the shelf, and I took it down and blew the dust off of it and began to read it. And that was the beginning of a divine rescue for me. All right, I'm going to keep going then. You just pause. I had the moment where we didn't live in the same city, and I didn't know any Christians. And I came to a place of desperation where I didn't want to live anymore. I couldn't live the life I was living anymore, and I didn't want to. And I ended up picking up the Bible for one last shot, and I opened it up, and my eyes fell on Matthew 11, verse 28, where Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest." And I hit my knees, and I said, "I am weary." And at that point in my life, I had actually tried to stop drinking. I'd tried to stop doing drugs, but I couldn't. But after that encounter with God, because that was my salvation prayer, I'm weary, I need you. One day I just noticed that it had been 2 weeks since I had done anything. And that was years since that had taken place. And so what began was my search to know Jesus as he really is. So I got involved with Campus Crusade for Christ, and I lost all my friends. I didn't know any Christians. They thought I was crazy, the people I used to know. And I plugged into a Bible study, and thus began my journey to be a wholehearted follower of Jesus.
Now, how did you circle back to John?
Well, he was a Christian, so he would come visit me about every 2 weeks. So I had liked him in high school. He had made my heart pitter patter, but he didn't like me. And then a little later, he liked me, but I didn't like him. But now that when he became a Christian, he was 100% in. I mean, that was it. Completely sold out. And then when I did, that's when the sparks flew between the two of us. So I lived in San Diego. He lived in Los Angeles. We'd see each other every couple of weeks. He was the one Christian I knew. We'd do Bible studies together when he would come visit. And it was 2 years later, I moved up to be near him, and a year later, we got married.
The early years of the marriage, did you see this as a divine ministry appointment? Did you have any vision that the future was going to hold this key to captivating and to this journey that you two have gone on together? Like they talk about the trees of Lebanon, the tall cedars, that they grow apart and they grow straight, not in each other's shadow, but without the strength of both of them and being the tallest, straightest trees, biblical trees. They grow close together, but not in each other's shadow. And
That was certain, excuse me. But yes, that was certainly our desire, but that was not the reality.
Okay.
When we got married, I think that we all know that when we become a Christian, that God does a lot of sanctifying work immediately, but it's a process of growth. And I had a lot of unhealed wounds in my life, and I didn't know what to do with them yet. So what I did was the external. I tried to look the part, and at church, I changed the way I dressed, and I did change my hair. I tried to fit into what I thought was the acceptable mold. And in a marriage, the two become one, but in our marriage, the two became John. And I really just buried myself and thought that that's what I was supposed to do, that anything that I wanted didn't matter. And it was about 3 years into our marriage where the divorce came up because we were living separate lives. He was busy we were doing theater ministry together. So we were about the things of the kingdom. But in terms of a marriage where I felt seen and known and pursued and actually needed, I didn't feel that. And I was me who brought up divorce one morning, and he had no idea that it had gotten to that point. And he scrambled to not only get us into counseling, but we went away for a weekend. And it was while we were away that we had this conversation where he wanted to know what my dreams were. And we began to dream together of creating a center where people could come and at that point learn perhaps theater ministry, learn a way to engage culture in a way that was relevant and alluring to Jesus. But it was on that weekend that I saw that God revealed to me how I was the perfect spouse for John, how I was uniquely qualified and called to partner with him, and that he needed me, that he couldn't do this on his own, that I was an essential part of our life, and that we had dreams together to pursue. And that is when our lives took a major turn for goodness.
The picture you paint is that same girl hiding in the closet.
Oh my goodness. When we first got married and John if he criticized anything in the slightest of way, like say the spaghetti, oh, this is a little underdone. I took that as a death sentence because any disappointment meant the bottom might fall out. And I would go, leave the table, and literally hide. As a new married couple, John would not know what was happening, and he had to come look for me, and he literally found me in the closet. So I do remember the first conversation where there was conflict, and it took everything I had. I had one foot in the bathroom ready to close the door and the other foot in the room where he still was, and to press through and even say, you're not my dad. I know you're not my father, and you're not going to treat me the same way. And oh, that was important. But that took a while because the hiding of my heart and who I was, it's a bent that I learned. And to learn that I'm actually welcomed, that I'm wanted for who I am, that's been a journey.
Stacey, you are every woman. You are every young girl who longed for the acceptance of her father, who felt completely separated from the earthly love and longed for a father's love and wound up finding it in the loving arms of Jesus. For each one of you that I speak to, I ask the same question. Had you had the perfect father on earth, would you have longed so much and fought so hard for this deep, abiding relationship with God? And the answer is almost always no, I probably wouldn't have. And so for so many of our hurting audience that have shared with me over the years their struggles to find that why didn't God give me the parents I wanted? The answer is because God gave you the parents you needed.
Mm.
And in order for you to have the impact and the voice that Stacey and John Eldredge have today, Stacey had to go through that sifting, that pressing, that hard place, that wilderness experience to come out on the other side of this, where she can be transparent enough to tell her story and honest enough to reveal her heart, which was broken and yet available. And it is only a broken vessel that light can shine through. A perfect vessel is too solid.
Mm-hmm.
Drop a candle into a canister and the light is extinguished.
Mm.
But drop it into a broken vessel and it illuminates the whole room, and especially the cracks become more beautiful. And that's the story that Stacey Eldredge has just told us. And yet, here she is, this many years later, on a journey again of struggle,
Mm-hmm.
in a book that defines hard times.
Mm-hmm.
You went through back to back to back to back to back to back difficulties that took you to the floor on many occasions. And yet, you became defiant, rebellious, unbreakable, immovable, unshakable, grabbing a hold of joy in a way that it was as if I was watching a rodeo and it was that 8-second ride on the bull.
Mm.
That this man was being flipped back and forth from head to toe but refused to let go of the rope. And when the whistle finally blew, when the horn went off, he didn't stop.
Mm.
He held on and he held on until they finally had to corral him and remove him, because he was going to be so defiant that nothing was going to break him. And this is the character of Stacey Eldredge in this new book, Defiant Joy. And I can only tell you that going along with this ride, I laughed, I cried, I lay down on the floor to feel and to see just the carpet fibers, just to think about what the sights and the smells that you were experiencing, to grow closer to you as an author and as a person, as someone that I have, you and John, that I've looked up to and respected for so many years. I want to dig into the text of this book, and I want to do it in a way that's honoring and doesn't cause us to take a break. So I'm going to take an early break right here. We're talking with Stacey Eldredge, author of the newly released book, Defiant Joy, Taking Hold of Hope, Beauty, and Life in a Hurting World. We're going to go on a journey that's going to start out not so happy, not so joyful, and it might be exactly the journey that you're going through right now. But when you come out the other side of this, you will have a defiant joy that cannot be broken, cannot be taken, one that was given to you by God Himself. And what you are defying is not God, you are defying this world and grabbing a hold of the hem of the garment of the one who came to bring you joy unspeakable. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Stacey Eldredge, author of the newly released book, Defiant Joy, Taking Hold of Hope, Beauty, and Life in a Hurting World. Stacey, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. So glad to be with you.
Stacey, the book opens up with just a series of one blow after another. I felt like I was in the first 3 rounds of a prize fight where the jabs, the uppercuts, the left hook, they all were coming at you simultaneously, including, and these are external things, family things, physical things, including a revitalized struggle with self-identity, self-worth, and self-image. And an underlying theme in all of this, which is kind of counterintuitive to this romance, to this beautiful love story of God and the Eldredges, for you yet to still struggle with some of the identity issues of the past, weight, appearance, these kind of things. You're very transparent about it, and I think you are beautiful and wonderful and an inspiration in so many ways. But take us to the genesis of this. It's Mr. Toad's wild ride through one knockout punch after another.
Yeah, I think that saying, when it rains, it pours, is really based on reality. And the year I wrote this was a year of deluges, of thunderstorms and hailstorms that were stripping the land barren. And it started with the suicide of my daughter-in-law's brother. And then that shock and that loss and walking through that. And then our son and his wife were expecting our first grandson when they lost him. And it really is one thing to experience pain yourself, but when one you love is in travail, it's a whole other thing. There was ministry things going on that were difficult. There was a close friend of mine who turned out to not be a close friend of mine. And I think everyone is familiar with betrayal, and I don't know if there's any pain quite like it. I'm really grateful that Jesus really understands what that's like. And then my husband's best friend, he'd been our pastor, our friend. He worked here with us at Ransomed Heart and loved him for 35 years. And then he went to heaven after a battle with leukemia. And it was after that, Eric, that I turned to food once again. It's an old thing for me, but one I had victory over. And in that place of, I was also recovering from a hip replacement surgery that I didn't know I needed to have. So I had 10 months of what became excruciating pain. And then I found solace in a donut. I didn't turn to Jesus in that moment. And then one donut, I think everybody knows, that's not enough. I got hooked right again in these pathways in my brain and a path of addiction that is really hard to get out of. Once you get in and give your heart away to something other than the heart of God, it gets pretty messy. So in that, the shame of not living well, the shame of living with knowing better. I know better. I know who's worthy. I know who can give me solace, and it's not going to be found in the baking aisle. But I opened up that box again, and it came back with a vengeance. And honestly, I've just begun turning the corner and getting victory in there again recently, but putting on pounds that I never thought I would see again. And then in the midst of that, in the midst of not liking what I saw in the mirror and not liking the choices that I was making, and then seeking God and saying, what do you think of me? Are you mad at me now? Are you disappointed? Or have I lost my place in your heart? And his resounding, constant, I love you. There's nothing that you can do. I think you're beautiful. And even I understand there's mercy and I forgive you. I will come close again. And to discover once again his immovable love, his pursuit of me that is never ending, it just makes my heart sing in a deeper way than it did before.
You talk about the holidays. We're approaching the holidays. Always a difficult time. One of the things that I shared with Dr. Gary Chapman in the time we spent with him was that it's really time we set aside our own agendas and our own languages and began to weigh in and listen to others a little bit more closely. And I think that part of the story behind the story of Defiant Joy was that there was a certain amount of contagion, that you were going to go through this, but you were going to pull as many people into this defiant joy as you possibly could. You weren't going to postpone, you weren't going to put off, you weren't going to allow this to derail your joy. And the defiance was not against God. It wasn't being what we would consider defiant, rebellious. It was saying to this world, and I don't give Satan that much credit. So I'm not one of those that, well, you know, we have this enemy and there's always this. Yes, our battle is against flesh, is not against flesh and blood. It's against the spiritual realm and the principalities. And yes, I agree with that completely. But not everything that happens is the devil, and not everything that goes on. And so it's not a matter of I'm choosing God, not choosing to give credit to it. But you really rose up. You found a fire in your belly that was different than the passion, compassion, and love affair that God wants to have with us, to this lead follower, get out of my way because I'm on a journey to hold on to this joy and I'm not letting go. And that's just the message, is that I'm going to know a joy. And it's interesting because the scripture that comes to mind is the last part. It's actually 2 Corinthians 5:17 through 6:10, where Paul tells us that even though I'm broke, I'm wealthy, even though I'm dying, I'm alive, even though I'm a bad report, I'm of good report, even though I'm maligned, I am uplifted. I mean, all those things that are so opposite to our condition and our circumstances is what defiant joy is all about. And that you are going to kick despair out, and that you are going to be defiantly joyful. What does that look like?
Well, sometimes it looks like celebrating in the midst of a sorrowful time. One thing you alluded to was our annual Christmas party, and it's a big event. We look forward to it all year long, where our ministry gathers to celebrate what God has done over the last year. And on this particular night, I've discovered it was the day of the Sandy Hook elementary school shootings, which were devastating. And when I learned, I wept, and I got my husband, and we wept, we prayed together, and we wondered, how can we celebrate in the face of such evil? And that's when the phrase, actually, defiant joy, was born, because we would say, and we did say, that even in the midst of sorrow and travail and heartbreak, we will celebrate the invasion of the kingdom, where Jesus came. He entered the darkness and he brought the light. And sometimes it looks like evil and darkness is winning, but it has lost. Jesus has won the victory, and we need to proclaim it. We need to enforce it. And so we did. We gathered that night, and we honored in silence and prayed for the families forever changed. But then we sang Christmas carols, and we feasted, and we talked, and we shared, and we celebrated that the kingdom of God is untouchable and on the move and prevailing, and the goodness not only has won, but is winning still. So it's really a thing of being tethered to the truth of eternity. Our circumstances change, and the news feed can take your heart out on any given day. But I can't be rooted. We can't be rooted in whether or not it's a good day, or I feel good, or my health is good, or there's nothing bad going on, because we live in a fallen world. But it's to the fallen world that Jesus came to rescue us. And it's because of that that I can hold on to the immovable, unshakable goodness and character of our God. And that changes everything.
In Jewish tradition, at a wedding, which is a wonderful celebration, we have the glass breaking ceremony. I don't know if you've experienced
I've been.
it. Okay, you've been. And so the glass breaking ceremony is to take this covenant cup and make sure that no one else ever uses it. But it's also as a reminder of the destruction of the Second Temple. So even into this perfect joy, there is this small bit of remembrance so that we never forget. You know, God throughout His Word gives us reminders. He said, "This do in remembrance of me." He says it on many, many different occasions, not just on the communion table, but there are things that even in your time of celebration, and even for all of us, in our time of celebration, there probably should be a moment of that defiant joy where we actually acknowledge that in our lives, you know, that old expression, every life rain must fall. That even though this past year there may have been, and we may recount, you know, most people Thanksgiving, what do you have to be thankful for? Maybe this Thanksgiving, it's one person says, let us not forget. Let us not forget. Let us use this celebration in defiant joy,
Yes.
and make it a milestone, make it a marker, make it an altar that we bring a sacrifice of praise into the house of the Lord as something that says that we're not trying to break the tone. What we're doing is we're saying that we're rising above.
Yes.
And in this rising above, that's where the more than conqueror, that's where
Yes.
the overcomer comes from. And this message that we serve the one who overcame this world, and because of that, He's reserved the right for us to be overcomers and to to eat from the tree of life. This is a celebration in spite of our circumstance. And we should embrace this defiant joy, and even to the point that if we can find a way to grab a hold of this and honor and acknowledge that we are defiantly joyful in spite of this that happened to our family in this past year, that
Yes.
we honor the memory, we honor the circumstance, we honor it, and we bring it into a whole new perspective when we say we're not going to allow that to define us any longer. We're now going to rise to the level that one gave his life for us, and now we can be defiantly joyful even in the face of terrible tragedy and terrible sorrow.
Absolutely. When we can look back at things and acknowledge they were very difficult, and that God didn't leave us in those times. In fact, sometimes, and you know this, it's in the darkest of times that we come to know God more deeply. What I love is a woman told me that her pain had become sacred because of what she came to know of God. It didn't diminish the pain and the suffering, but it was a part of her testimony. So she calls it sacred pain. Give God the glory and remember what He has done.
The way you've laid the book out, as we come toward the end of the book, we start talking about looking at the signs all around us. You live in Colorado where the climate changes rapidly. There are sometimes signs, sometimes not signs. Sometimes you're out there at 70 degrees and the next day you write about it being snow-covered. It is as changing as, I think you even talked about the fact that May is when you plant flowers. Everybody knows that, but most people are defiant because they have one nice day in March and they're out there just trying to defy nature, which is just not possible. But there are signs all around us that God uses.
Yes. Right. Creation is the display of his glory. And the seasons really speak to them. That springtime, the newness, the new life, summer, the gorgeousness of it, autumn, the bounty and the harvest, and then winter, things going into slumber again. And I think it echoes our lives because we don't always live in a season of newness, nor do we always live in a season of everything going great and is bearing much fruit. Sometimes our lives can look stark and frozen. In fact, you may have places where you even feel dead, and yet you're not. There are seasons to slumber. There are seasons to rest. And in those places, God, who is always at work, is doing a deep thing, and there will be spring again. So seeing the daffodils go into the ground as bulbs, and then doing their exultant, defiant thing. They burst through snow here. It's snow on the ground, but there's a daffodil blooming. It's a reminder to me that the resurrection is real. Death doesn't win. The resurrection wins.
So how do we cultivate this joy? It sounds very intentional and something that we have to honor the heartbreak. There's no joy in suicide. There's no joy in miscarriage. There's no joy in leukemia. There's no joy in death. There's no joy in betrayal.
Right.
There's just no joy there.
No.
There's no, as hard as I try and as much as I read and as much as I do, the only thing I can do is find the joy that the Lord has sustained me to endure this terrible trial that Joseph endured for 25 years from the day he got the dream to the day the dream came through. How do we cultivate joy in the midst of heartache?
I'm going to say two key ways. One is to not deny the suffering. There's no joy to be found if you are pretending that your life is better than it is, or you're happy when you're not, or things are going better when they're not. Jesus doesn't ask us to ignore our reality, but to invite him into it, that we bear it together. So the first thing is be honest about your life. We can take it. And the second thing, the real key to unlocking joy is gratitude. It's cultivating a thankful heart. And even in the midst of heartbreak and pain, there are things that we can be thankful for. What I encourage people to do, Eric, is really just start with a list of things they like. Maybe there's nothing a person in a season can say that they're thankful for because it's just too hard. But there are still things they like. Maybe they like the sound of a bird or a blue sky or coffee, the fragrance of coffee in the morning, or there's things that we can still like. And to think on those, and then at the end of that, thank God for them. It cracks open a door to cultivate a heart where you are remembering good things. So remembering is essential. Remembering, looking back and seeing the testimony of your life, the faithfulness of God, the creation of things that you enjoy, and then to cultivate being thankful for them is something that will increase our joy because it shifts our gaze to the one who never changes.
You include in your book a quote from Dennis Prager.
Yes.
Do you have the book handy, or do you want me to read it?
You go ahead, read it. I don't
Okay.
have it handy.
All right, Dennis Prager, a nationally syndicated radio talk show host and author, wrote, "For much of my life, I, like most people, regarded the pursuit of happiness as largely a selfish pursuit. One of the great revelations of middle age has been that happiness, far from being only a selfish pursuit, is a moral demand. When we think of character traits, we rightly think of honesty, integrity, moral courage, and acts of altruism. Few people include happiness in any list of character traits or moral achievements, but happiness is both. Happiness, or at least acting happy, or at the very least not inflicting one's unhappiness on others, is no less important in making the world better than any other human trait. With some exceptions, happy people make the world better, and unhappy people make it worse." You wrote this in the chapter on behalf of love.
Yes. Yes. Because sometimes we can't make the choice to cultivate joy for our own benefits. But when we realize that it has a direct impact on the people that are in our world, we can make choices on their behalf. And that's really, if being a happy person is a moral responsibility, then how much more being a joyful person? And by joy, I don't mean happiness times 1,000. I mean a substance where you're rooted into the kingdom of God in a steadiness. And that is something that we're meant to know. And then we're meant to offer that to those around us. It makes us pleasant to be around. It makes their lives better, and it allures others to the heart of God.
You finish the book at the very end, of course, in the appendixes are daily prayers and acknowledgments, but your last chapter, now I'm going to take a guess at how to say it, but is it away how?
It's close. It's a hooey ho.
A hooey ho.
Yes.
Okay. And what is a hooey ho?
A hooey ho is Hawaiian, and it means see you later. So in Hawaii, they don't say goodbye. They never say goodbye. It's always see you later, a hooey ho. And it made me laugh because on an island, you probably are going to see each other. But I love it because we can say it to one another. And when our dear friend passed, it was the last thing I said to him. He knew what I meant, because I knew as well that though I didn't want to say goodbye to him, I don't want to live my life without him in these days here, but I know I will see him again. So it was and is to all that we have to say goodbye. I could say to him, I'll see you later.
In Hebrew, it's called lahit ra'ot.
Oh, I love that.
And it's exactly what that means. I'll see you again, or I'll see you later. I don't ever say goodbye when I leave Israel. I always say lahit ra'ot. I'm there every year for several weeks out of every year, have been for the last 16 years. It is my second home, and my family of faith is really headquartered there in Israel. And it's always lahit ra'ot.
Lahit ra'ot.
Yeah,
Did I say it right?
lahit ra'ot.
Lahit ra'ot.
And that's a hui ho. Okay?
Nice.
And that's exactly what we will say to you, because we've come very close to the end of our time together, is that I will see you again, and I think that I probably will see John and make that happen, that I'd like to see the both of you again here on Revealing the Truth. The book is called Defiant Joy, Taking Hold of Hope, Beauty, and Life in a Hurting World by Stasi Eldredge. It is not the read that says that everything is going to be okay, that you are going to avoid pain and suffering. It's not the book that tells you that this is the way out. It actually is the book that tells you that this is the way in. This is the way in to a deeper and a more abiding relationship with God. This is the way in to understanding that even though God rent the curtain in two and suffered at the loss of his only son, that was not the end, but that was the beginning of a whole new season of life, even though it began with death. And this is what God has for you in the pages of Defiant Joy. That even in the face of death is new life. Even in the face of tragedy is new life. And that you can choose to be defiantly joyful, not mocking, not disrespectful, but grabbing a hold of the one that grabbed a hold of you, the one who sacrificed it all so that you could have, even in your moments of despair, you could defiantly be joyful that you have breath, that you have love, that you have a relationship with God, that you know that God sent His only begotten Son to take your sin upon Him, and that He died for you. But that was not the end. That was the beginning. That His death brought the beginning of new life for you and for me, and gave you the ability to have a defiant joy. The same way that God wants you to stand up, to dust yourself off, and to proclaim His glory. If you've ever wondered, how does man see your good works and let your light shine? It's defiantly. It's defying the circumstances, because your victory is in your response. It is not in your circumstances. And Defiant Joy is that story of how to work your way through the tragedy and become defiantly joyful in spite of your circumstances. Stacey Eldredge, another classic, another wonderful contribution to the body, and I thank you for sharing it with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thank you. Thank you. My honor.
God bless you, my friend. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.